Buying your first property is supposed to be exciting. The first step on the housing ladder, your own place, the dream of home ownership finally coming true. But here's the reality. It can also be stressful, expensive, and full of surprises you didn't see coming. There are things that no one tells you, not the estate agent, not the mortgage broker, not even the mortgage calculators online. And those things, they can cost you money, time, and a lot of headaches. I'm Jeff, a qualified chartered accountant, and on this channel, we talk all things personal finance and investing. But today, I'm going to talk about property, specifically the things I wish I knew before buying my first place. In this video, I'm going to be covering all that I can as it relates to buying a property, and I'll be going in chronological order as well, which will hopefully make it easier for you first-time buyers out there to know all the various steps. But before we get into it, please could you do me a massive favor and hit the like button and also subscribe so you don't miss future videos. I owe you one. Now, let's jump right in. The first thing you'll need to think about when buying a property is determining how much house you should afford versus how much house you can afford. This is so important. Now, banks will typically offer you a maximum mortgage value of around 4 times your gross annual salary. And if you're planning on getting a joint mortgage with somebody else, then it will be your combined annual salaries that the banks will look at. First word of warning though, banks will often lend you more than what you can comfortably afford. It's very tempting to buy the most expensive property that you can afford based off your salary, but this is a massive trap. Remember, the bigger the mortgage, the bigger your monthly repayments / the longer you will have to pay off your mortgage. I strongly recommend you have a monthly budget tracker if you haven't got this already. You'll need to use this to estimate what your monthly outgoings are, and then add on top of that the mortgage payment and all of the costs that come with owning a property, which I'll be getting to later in the video. Here's the kicker. If you want to be more comfortable, you'll also want to still be able to set aside money for your savings and investments too. A good rule of thumb to use is that all of your fixed costs of living, for example, your mortgage payments, car insurance, groceries, should be no more than 60% of your take-home salary. Any higher than this, you're putting yourself at risk of having to live paycheck to paycheck as you simply bought too much house that you could actually afford. Remember, at the end of the day, the bank can take your house away if you don't pay them back the money they lent you. So you are the one footing most of the risk, not the bank. Furthermore, you should also consider what would happen if interest rates jumped up. Would you still be able to comfortably afford your mortgage? Have a think on that. Now you know how much house you should afford in terms of a mortgage. You should be saving up for your deposit. Let's assume a 10% deposit for now. Take the mortgage value that you are able to comfortably afford, divide this by 90% and multiply by 10% to get the deposit you need. For example, if the maximum mortgage you can afford is £360,000, dividing this by 90% and then multiplying by 10% gives you a deposit of £40,000. Add these two numbers together and you get the total value of the house that you are comfortably able to afford, in this case, £400,000. Now, 10% is quite a small deposit, and you'd ideally want this to be 20% or even 25% to reduce the size of your mortgage. Play around with the numbers and see if having a bigger deposit is realistic for your circumstances. I do appreciate that property prices are crazy, and it may not be realistic to save about a 20% deposit. However, if it means that you would have to save for a little longer, do consider it, as it may pay massive dividends down the road as it will reduce your mortgage payments. There are two other reasons why it's better to have a larger deposit. Firstly, it means that you own more of your house outright, giving you a bit more peace of mind that you're going to be able to afford to pay off this mortgage in the long run. Second of all, the larger the deposit, the better your loan to value ratio is, also known as LTV ratio. The LTV ratio calculates the proportion of the mortgage to the value of the property. In our previous example, we had a 10% deposit, and therefore the LTV ratio is 90%, i.e. 360 grand divided by 400 grand. Here's the key though. The lower your LTV ratio is, the lower the interest rate the banks will offer you on your mortgage. This is because the less the bank has to lend you as a proportion of the value of the property, the less risky it is for the bank. LTV thresholds tend to be in 5 to 10% increments, so if you're remortgaging a few years down the line and you're right on the threshold of being in the 80% LTV ratio instead of 85%, for example, you can for sure consider overpaying your mortgage a bit if you can afford to, as being in that lower threshold will save you a lot of interest in the long run. The threshold ends at 60%, So it's not going to make a difference if your LTV ratio is 40% or 59%. You'll be offered the same interest rates. Final thing to cover off in this section is whatever you do, do not put your deposit savings into investments while you are saving up. You want to rely on guaranteed interest income from your savings account that you can draw on when you need to pay the deposit. The last thing you want is a downturn in the market just as you're trying to complete on a house. It will be a disaster as you might not have enough of a deposit. Stamp duty is a surprisingly large tax that sneaks up on you when you're in the process of buying a property. Stamp duty is calculated as a percentage of the value of the property you are trying to buy and will be cheaper if you're a first-time buyer. Note, if you're planning on having a joint mortgage, but one of you have owned a property in the past, you will not qualify for the first-time buyer discount. Depending on the state of the property that you want to buy, you'll likely need to spend at least a little bit of money doing things out. It could range from doing a bit of repainting and buying some furniture to spending tens of thousands replastering all the walls and getting a new kitchen installed. This is very important to consider at the outset when you first start looking at properties to buy. So you've done the maths and you can afford a deposit, the mortgage and the stamp duty. Well done. You're ready to get serious about buying a property and nearly ready to be able to put an offer in for a house. But to do this, you will need a mortgage agreement in principle. This is basically just a document that proves to the property seller that you are a serious buyer and you are able to afford the house. You can obtain one from applying to a bank, but the easiest way is to speak to a mortgage broker who can collect all the relevant data that they need and they can provide you with a mortgage agreement in principle. Note, you are not obligated to stick with the bank you got your mortgage in principle from. The mortgage broker will help you find the best lender for you. This is just to get the ball rolling on putting in an offer for a house. Once you have an offer on a house accepted, you now need to formally apply for a mortgage. I would also highly recommend that you shop around yourself to see what mortgages you could potentially get. I also highly recommend getting a mortgage broker if you haven't done so already, and they can be absolutely free. Their job is to find the best mortgage for you, not just in terms of the best interest rate and therefore the cheapest, but they also consider things like how long on average it takes for the mortgage to be offered, which is useful if you're in a rush. I personally use L&C, who are free to use and were great. Note, not financial advice and not sponsored. Free mortgage brokers typically have a very wide range of mortgage lenders that they look at. However, if you want what is called a whole of market mortgage broker who look at all of the mortgage lenders available, these mortgage brokers would typically charge you a fee. If you're not confident on running the numbers on how big a mortgage you will be able to afford, feel free to contact a mortgage broker right at the start of this process to help you with the numbers. There are so many types of mortgages which I'm not going to be able to cover all in one video today, but the key ones are generally fixed rate mortgages, which give you the same interest rate over the period of the mortgage, and variable mortgages, which track the Bank of England base rate plus a percentage. Therefore, it depends on how risk averse you are in terms of which mortgage is best for you. For me, I'm quite risk averse, so I tend to like 5-year fixed rate mortgages, as gives me a guarantee of how much I need to pay each month. Once the 5 years are up, I'll then remortgage onto another 5-year mortgage until my total 25-year mortgage is complete. Hopefully over time, taking advantage of improving LTV ratios that I spoke about earlier. One thing that you may not have realized is that mortgage lenders generally charge you a mortgage arrangement fee, which is a one-time charge at the start of the mortgage term. This can range wildly, but I would budget at least £1,000 for this. You'll sometimes get this option of having this fee added to your mortgage, but I don't like to do this as I'd be paying interest on it, so I'd rather just pay all at the start. Conveyancing is basically the legal process of buying a property, and it's a nightmare. I've gone through this process twice, and it's kind of like listening to nails scratching on the chalkboard whilst getting your teeth pulled out. It's a painful process dealing with solicitors as you need to continually chase them for various things whilst repeating yourself numerous times as they don't read your requests in your emails. Unfortunately, there's no getting out of it, and of course, you'll have to pay for the privilege to go through this process. You'll also need to pay for various property searches, surveys, and valuations to be carried out. I will budget at least a few £1,000s for all of this. If you've reached the stage of the house buying process, hang in there. You'll get there eventually. And if you've recently bought a property, what do you wish you'd known before? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories. Next is a word of warning about chains. This is where the owners of the house you are buying are also at the same time trying to buy their next house while selling their existing house. This chain extends and extends until the last person in the chain is not looking to buy another property and just wants to sell up. Beware, try to buy a house that is not in the chain, as it will save you a huge amount of time and stress. Because there's always a risk that one of the transactions in the chain falls through, which puts the whole rest of the chain at risk of falling through. Mortgage offers typically last for 6 months, and I was super close to exceeding this time limit when I purchased the house I'm currently living in, because I myself was in the chain as I had to sell my previous property at the same time. Congratulations! Hopefully you've now completed on your house purchase and you can look forward to living in your new property. Now you just need to worry about all the other costs that come with owning a property. If the property you purchase is a flat or apartment, you'll likely have to pay an annual service charge for the upkeep of the common areas of the building and the surroundings. Unless you have a share of freehold, you won't have any control of how much this will be, and it's completely determined by the property management company or the owner of the freehold. For instance, the small flat I used to own in London was typically around £1,000 a year, but one year the roof needed replacing and the service charge that year was £5,000. That's why it's so important to have an emergency fund of 3 to 6 months of living expenses to be able to pay for these unexpected costs. If you want to see how easy it is to save for service charges and other annual costs, check out my video here. Council tax is another cost that you don't have much control over, but you can challenge it under the right circumstances. If you want me to cover this off, let me know in the comments. Council tax charges depend on the council tax band that you are in and can be very costly, as you have no control over how much the council increases this by each year. Note, you can get a single person's discount of 25% if you live by yourself or meet other criteria, so bear that in mind. Buildings insurance is required by mortgage lenders if you own a house. The cost of this depends on many factors, but I would budget £500 a year for this just to be safe. Buildings insurance can be bundled up with contents insurance, but you're not obligated to buy contents insurance. You never know when something in your house is going to break, like a boiler, a washing machine, or God forbid, a toilet malfunction. Therefore, you should be utilizing your emergency fund if big expenses appear, as it's what it's there for. Just make sure that you top up your emergency fund if you need to dip into it. Similar to a deposit, your emergency fund should be held in a savings account rather than invested into the stock market, as again, you don't want to take your chance of having to replace your roof in the middle of a recession when the markets have collapsed. One minor thing to add is regarding post-redirection. It's a relatively small cost to pay for post-redirection for 12 months. This should give you plenty of time to change your addresses on all your various things you might receive post for. If you just sold a house and moved into a new one, another tip would be to be friendly with the person who bought your property. Get their phone number so that if for some reason you get a letter sent to your old address, they can send it on to you. This is free for them, as they simply need to cross out the address on the letter they received that was meant for you and write redirect to, and then your new address, and Raw Mail will get this delivered on for free. Now things have settled down after moving in, you can consider overpaying your mortgage. Lenders will typically allow you to overpay your mortgage by 10% of the existing balance per year. Unless you come into a lot of money, you might struggle to get anywhere close to this amount. But if you do, the bank will charge you an overpayment fee. This is a great tool if your mortgage interest rate is high and savings interest rates are lower than this, as this would mean that you'll save money overall. However, once you overpay, you can't get the money back if you need it in a pinch. Therefore, it's best to have an emergency fund before considering overpaying a non-mortgage. I quite like to overpay on my mortgage by a little bit, even though I might be a little better off as if I just got my savings interest on that same money, mainly because paying off my mortgage as quickly as possible is a huge goal of mine, as I don't want to have debts hanging over me. Also, it will help my LTV ratio. So as you've seen in this video, buying a property is not quick and easy, but if you're willing to put in the time and effort, it can be extremely rewarding to have a property in your name rather than paying a landlord rent. Do bear in mind, though, that buying a house is not for everyone, and renting could actually work out cheaper if you consider all other costs involved in home ownership. This is especially the case if you're young and plan to be moving locations a lot before settling down. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, take care of yourself. I'm Jeff, and I'll see you soon.